So anyway, welcome today. My name is Ron Bean. I'm with Utah State University's Clinical and Counseling Psychology Department. I've been asked to come and speak about stress management today. And so, I figured the best way to present on this is less formal. So if you have any questions, please feel free to just raise your hand. And since we're recording this, I'll repeat your question just to make sure that it gets recorded well. So anyway, stress is both physiological and biological and psychological. Stress is the body's automatic response to threats or any mental or physical demands that are placed upon it. Not all stress is bad, and as we'll see, there's a video in a little bit in the presentation where it talks about the perception of stress. And in that video, I don't want anybody to raise their hands when actually she doesn't ask to raise their hands in the video. I forgot that I trimmed that part out. Sorry. Stress. Anyway, so stress can be very beneficial to our lives, as we're about to talk about and everything. It helps us in life-threatening situations, and it helps us, it can help us to perform to the best of our abilities. So the symptoms of stress start out, we have part of our autonomic nervous system is what we call the sympathetic nervous system. And the sympathetic nervous system is what is responsible for regulating our stress response and fear response. And so when we are faced with stress or faced with fear, our body does a number of things to prepare us to be able to fight or flight, as they say, or to run away. And so it's really interesting because our eyes dilate, it narrows our focus, and it also, in a way, parallels to what's going on mentally. Our focus narrows to, obviously, those things that are stressful or dangerous. We want most of our attention placed there. And so our eyes dilate, our blood pressure, our blood vessels constrict, our heart rate increases. It increases the amount of blood to our muscle system. It also, our breathing rate increases. That increases the oxygen available to our muscles and to our brains. Our sweating starts. Our endocrine system starts kicking out adrenaline and noradrenaline and oxytocin, which we'll discuss in a moment. And our digestive system actually slows down because that's not necessary in those moments. But our endocrine system also kicks in and starts to release glucagon, which helps our liver process glucose into energy for our muscles and for our brain. And so a lot goes on. And one of the problems with this system is it's a beautiful system. It helps us in times of stress and everything, but it is not healthy for us to stay at those levels. And so we have a second system called the parasympathetic nervous system that kicks in, that's, kind of comes in and says, all right, nothing to see here, everybody calm down. And our heart rate excuse me, were you able to find a water?
Yes.
Thank you so much. I apologize. And so, it's not healthy for our system to stay like that. So our parasympathetic nervous system comes in, our heart rate returns back to normal, our breathing rate returns back to normal, and everything returns back to normal, which is what we call homeostasis, our active, average level of physiological arousal. And so stress kind of has an interesting relation between what goes on in our bodies, what goes on in our minds, and the behaviors that we engage in when we deal with stress. And so let's say, for example, a doctor gives you 2 new prescriptions and you're not sure if the insurance is going to cover them. And let's just say that, finances are kind of tight, so that's a stressful situation for you. And so your body, obviously, you have the increase in blood pressure, the heart rate, and all of those types of things that we discussed. In your mind, we start rehearsing things and thoughts start coming through. How am I going to pay for this? Is this medication even going to work for me? Or, what are the side effects of these things? And then our behavior. What's going on with our behaviors? How are we eating? How are we sleeping? what are we talking about? When we're stressed out, it's really easy for us to focus, like we said, on the things that are stressing us out. So when we get around people, those are the things that tend to come up, which kind of keep perpetuating this cycle, and it goes right back into the more I talk about it, the more I get worked up, and so forth. Thank you so very much. And so I have this video here, and the question that she asks is, the audience, she asks them to raise their hands. Do you identify with having low stress, an average amount of stress, or high stress? And it's really interesting because she talks about a study, and then I'll continue to talk about another study related to how we perceive our own level of stress. And so here is Dr. McGonigal.
For years, I've been telling people stress makes you sick. It increases the risk of everything from the common cold to cardiovascular disease. Basically, I've turned stress into the enemy. But I've changed my mind about stress. And today, I want to change yours. Let me start with the study that made me rethink my whole approach to stress. This study tracked 30,000 adults in the United States for 8 years. And they started by asking people, how much stress have you experienced in the last year? They also asked, do you believe that stress is harmful for your health? And then they used public death records to find out who died. Okay, some bad news first. People who experienced a lot of stress in the previous year had a 43% increased risk of dying. But that was only true for the people who also believed that stress is harmful for your health. People who experienced a lot of stress but did not view stress as harmful were no more likely to die. In fact, they had the lowest risk of dying of anyone in the study, including people who had relatively little stress. Now, the researchers estimated that over the 8 years they were tracking deaths, 182,000 Americans died prematurely, not from stress, but from the belief that stress is bad for you. That is over 20,000 deaths a year.
So the perception and how we interact with our own level of stress becomes very important. If we instead view stress as our body preparing itself to meet the challenges, the increased heart rate prepares more blood for our muscles and brain. The increased respiration increases the oxygen available to both our muscles and our brain. Then things change for us because normally our blood vessels are, relaxed. And when stress comes up, our blood vessels constrict, which, like I say, helps with the delivery of the oxygen and stuff to the areas of our body that need it. But it is not healthy to stay there. And so in this study, they also found that people who viewed stress as helpful for them under a stress test, their vessels did not constrict at all, or nearly as much as those who did not view stress as healthy. And so over time, that can really change the way our heart health is for us. And so another thing that happens is we talked about the endocrine system and releasing adrenaline and noradrenaline, but equal to adrenaline, our system also releases oxytocin, which many people have heard of oxytocin. It's often called the cuddle hormone because it's the hormone that people talk about, feelings of joy, feeling of that we get when we have a connection with someone or maybe a good hug or something like that. This hormone that feels so good is actually a stress hormone. And what's even more important for the topic of stress is not only does our brain have receptors for this oxytocin, but our heart does as well. And our heart uses oxytocin to regenerate heart tissue. So in a way, stress leads to improved heart health. And so that's really important to consider, that these things are happening, and how we interact with it and how we behave and how we structure our lives can really change the way that stress has an impact on our physical and emotional health. So again, stress is often about perception, not just what life gives us, but how we respond to it and how we understand it. External events, no matter how devastating, are not stressful in and of themselves. It is the way we respond and the threats that we perceive that makes all those differences. So we can change the situation, change our perception of the situation, or change what we do about it. And so during times of stress, like I said, our mind tends to focus on what we deem to be the most relevant elements. And so it's doing a lot of shortcuts. And so some of those shortcuts include, all or nothing thinking, this always happens, rather than thinking, well, this happens a lot, and really I'm not happy about it. But when we jump to that, this always happens, it makes the threat appear, or we perceive it to be a more pervasive and a bigger problem than it is, on its face. Other ones are overgeneralization, using bits of information to generalize to mean, well, this means this in that circumstance, so why doesn't it mean that in this one and everything else? And so our problem with one circumstance becomes a problem with more. Discounting the positives, again, we're looking for threats. We perceive them to be negative, and so it's really easy to say, here's a negative, here's a negative, here's a negative, without also looking at other positive things that are going on. And again, making problems, we perceive them to be bigger than they are on their face. Jumping to conclusions is another one that is very common and very challenging, is because we have a history of things happening a certain way, and if we continue to behave in the same ways, then the outcomes logically may be the same. But we can change circumstances. We can change the way we deal with things. We can maybe have a talk with someone that is at the heart of a problem, maybe, doing other strategies that can change the conclusion. So magnifying and minimizing, again, focusing on one area and making it a bigger thing, and then other discounting information. Well, that's nice, but that's not what I'm focused on right now. Should statements are another one. Should statements are tied to judgment. Looking back and saying, I wish I would have done that differently yesterday is very different than I should have done that differently yesterday, meaning, or taking it a step further, saying, I am X, Y, or Z because I did that yesterday. Being objective with the information is quite different than being judgmental about it. So what can we do with stress? And so I'd like to lead in just a brief mindfulness exercise, because breathing, research shows breathing to be very, very effective in the management of stress, both in the moment and when incorporated into your daily routine, overall health. I come from a small town in Idaho. I was a farm kid before I came to school for years and years. And when they first started talking mindfulness, I'm like, I don't know if I buy this stuff. And so I got in, I gave it an honest try, and I can honestly say I do practice mindfulness every day. It for me has been a real game changer, because mindfulness is about two things: being present in the moment, what's going on around me right now, getting into my physical world. The more I'm in contact with my senses, what do I see around me? What do I hear? What smells are present in the room? And the more I'm focused on the things that are going on around me, the less time my mind has to go, hey, remember that thing you've been worrying about for 20 years? Oh, it's still here, So we try to get present with the things that are around us, so we're actually dealing with the life that is today, because that is so important. Everything but this moment is a mental representation, whether it's a memory for something that happened yesterday or thinking about or forecasting what's going to happen tomorrow. None of that is guaranteed, and nothing we can do really changes much about yesterday. So the more we focus on being present today, we can look at, here I am, here's what's going on for me, and here are some solutions that get me closer to the things that are really important to me or that I feel would be solutions to the problem. The second piece of mindfulness that is so important and often overlooked, in my opinion, is judgment. We are so quick to judge everything around us. When we see a new color on a car, we judge, is that a good color? Is that a bad color? It's meaningless, but we do that so instinctually. And we do that with ourselves and our situations. This happens, was that good? Was that bad? Did she smile at me good? Or was that, we're always trying to do that. And so it gets us up here thinking about, trying to mind read and predict and do all of these things that really increase our levels of stress. And so I would like to lead a real brief mindfulness exercise. I'll be emailing out a list of resources, about everything that I talk about today. We'll talk about sleep here in a moment as well. But in this exercise, it'll be really brief, but mainly we're focusing on two things. Just paying attention to what's going on with our breathing and trying to avoid judging things and everything else. And the reason why that is so important is because mindfulness is hard. Our mind goes a mile a minute on autopilot. And so when we try to slow down and try to just focus on our breathing, our mind keeps kicking things in. And so if that happens for you, rather when it happens for you, I've been practicing mindfulness for 5 years. It happens to me every time. We just bring our attention back to our breathing non-judgmentally and continue the practice. So we're basically trying to increase positivity in our life in these moments and try to avoid adding any more negativity. So get comfortable. You do not have to close your eyes. It is easier for some people if they do close their eyes. But just close your eyes, or if you're comfortable, and begin getting acquainted with your breathing. You might notice the temperature of the air as you inhale, and how that might be different as you exhale. And again, if you find yourself focusing on a thought or a sound, just gently bring your mind back to your breathing and back to this moment. You might notice the texture of the air and what it might feel like as you inhale and how that might be different as you exhale. You find yourself noticing the chiming of a clock, just bring your attention back to the room. Again, practicing non-judgmental, present moment awareness. And so when you're ready, you can open your eyes and then we'll continue. Okay, so this was a really brief exercise, and in the resources that I'm going to email out, there is a free app that you can put on your smartphone and that you can listen to, and there are a number of different mindfulness exercises that you can engage in. Some are specifically for sleep, which again, we'll talk about sleep here in just a moment, but there's a 10-minute one that helps you calm down and focus your mind on being able to sleep. A lot of my clients report they just drift off in the middle of it, which, all right, so that's fine. You can do this while driving. Be fully aware of what you can see. Maybe turn down the radio, listen to the sounds of, the wind and the tires on the road, what it feels like to be in motion, just paying attention to the things around you rather than what's going on. There's a book that I often recommend to my clients called Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life. And I love that title because that's kind of what we're doing. And just doing that throughout our day. You can do it while you're eating, which mindful eating has shown to have weight loss effects, and so paying attention to the flavor of the food rather than just mindlessly eating that bag of chips and wondering, where did my chips go? It's because we weren't paying attention and enjoying the chips. We were just watching our TV and mindlessly just eating like I do. And so this breathing can be a really positive thing. Deep breathing slows the heart rate, it decreases the blood pressure, it increases our mood, improves our mood, and it activates the parasympathetic nervous system that we discussed a little bit earlier. Next, honestly, laughter really is the best medicine. Research shows that 5 minutes of laughter a day improves cardiovascular functioning. So it is fun, Listen to something you enjoy. Do something that makes you smile. These are good and healthy things. Eating a balanced diet is another thing. Obviously, since we're talking about heart health and all of that, doing what we can to maintain proper levels of cholesterol and all of these types of things also improve our stress levels. So again, balanced diet, exercising at least 20 minutes 3 times per week also is great, and then we get into sleep. And so good sleep habits. We try to go to bed and wake up around the same time each day. Obviously, that's difficult, so we do the best that we can. We try to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep because, again, it improves all of the same things and our immune health especially. Plus, our cognitive functioning is improved because much of our memory consolidation and all of that occurs while we are asleep. So if we're having trouble getting to sleep, staying asleep, or waking up earlier than we intend, we can engage in a number of steps, what we call sleep hygiene. And there's also an app in your resources that's titled CBTI that has all of these, and it's kind of an interactive little thing that helps kind of improve your levels of sleep. So number one, trying to go to bed again at the same time or getting up at the same time to kind of set that circadian rhythm. And that circadian rhythm is aided by the sunlight. We have a spot in our brain that's right above where our optic nerves cross, and its only job is to measure how much light is coming into our eyes. That's why when we're asleep and somebody turns on a light or the sun comes up, that's why we're waking up. And so one of the big things is we try to avoid all activity in our bed but sleep and intimacy. And that especially includes cell phones and TVs, because that concentrated light, especially from cell phones, comes right into our eyes and tells our brain, wait a minute, it's pretty light here, and so our sleep is interrupted. So other things that we can do is we want to avoid caffeine after about lunchtime, because we're all familiar with that 2 o'clock slump when it kind of just gets there, kind of get tired and everything. That happens because that is when the first of our sleep hormones for the day is starting to be released. So our body starts preparing for sleep long before we actually go to sleep. And so that happens, our body kind of normalizes back out a little bit, and that's when we get our second wind. When we have all that bright light, that also interrupts those sleep hormones and stuff like that, like we said. If your sleep schedule is off, you want to avoid naps. Some people can take naps and it doesn't, mess up their nighttime sleep habits. And if that works for you, that's just fine. But while you're trying to reestablish good sleep, it's helpful to just eliminate naps and, like I say, the caffeine, for those reasons. Another reason we avoid the activities in bed is we want to reinforce or condition ourselves so as soon as our head hits the pillow, we can go to sleep. Some people are amazing at that. Some people like myself, that is naturally really, really hard. And so what we do is what we call the 15-minute rule. Once you go to bed and you're trying to go to sleep, if after 15 minutes you're not asleep or real close to it, we recommend you get up, get out of bed, and go do some low light, low energy activity. Reading is a good one if you've got low light, until you start feeling tired again, and then you can go back to your bedroom, lay down, and try and do it. And that reinforces that conditioning that as soon as my head hits the pillow, I got to go to sleep. That means sleep hygiene and trying to improve your sleep can be a real pain in the neck with that. My clients, if they ever are mad at me, that's often the cause because they didn't get much sleep the night before. Because if you do it and you're not asleep after 15 minutes, you get back up and get out again. And you just repeat the cycle. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that you're really good and tired. So that might mean the first couple days during the day you're more tired, but that is to your benefit at night to help establish those habits. So again, a lot of times when I'm working with sleep with clients, if they're really stick with the program for 2, 3, 4, 5 nights, many of my clients report, that is much improved. So thankfully the 15-minute rule doesn't have to be a pain in the neck too long, usually. So exercise, again, at least 20 minutes 3 times a week improves your stamina, strength, your immune functioning, and of course your cardiovascular health. And on top of releasing all of the endorphins that make us feel good, So other helpful strategies we can engage in: reaching out. Like I said, oxytocin, the cuddle hormone, the connection hormone. Reaching out to people, talking with people, that helps improve the amount of oxytocin that heals our heart and helps make us feel good. Setting aside differences, picking our battles. Which battles really are a big thing, and which are things that I am engaging in that might not be to my own benefit, or am I making too big of a deal out of? We all have certain things that we're pretty particular about. And so just being mindful of, is this as big of a deal as it feels like to me? Looking at all the evidence. Learning to say no, structuring our time, sometimes working ahead, If getting up in the morning is a stressful experience as you're trying to figure out what you're going to wear, what you're going to eat, all of these types of things, there are ways that you can start your day without that extra stress. Setting out your clothes the night before. One of my professors loved cereal in the morning and would set out their bowl of cereal the night before and have everything ready but the milk. And so they would get ready, dump the cereal, eat out the door, without all the stress of, oh my gosh, where's my shoes? Where's my pants? Where's, all of the types of things that happen for me and a lot of people. Set aside time to play. Self-care is ultra important. In those times when you're stressed, we feel like I don't have time to do anything for me. When in actuality, if you're not putting stuff into your bucket, eventually you're going to run out of resources. And so a lot of times taking a little bit extra time to do something for you helps charge you up and give you the resources you need to face the stresses that are part of everyday life. Most important responsibility is you. And finally, seek professional help when you need it. Obviously we open the newspaper every day and there's a new story about somehow mental health is affecting our country and the world at large. It is important. Mental health has had a stigma attached to it that, I can't tell anybody. No one can know that I am talking to someone and needing help. There is nothing wrong with needing help. And many people, probably the most common thing I hear, I work down at the VA with PTSD treatment. And probably the thing I hear the most commonly in my older veterans is, I don't know why I did that to myself for so many years, when I could have just come in, changed the way that I experienced life, and been happier and healthier for all of these years. So, are there any questions? All right. Well, thank you very much for coming. And like we said, we have sign-up sheets for individual time. If you have any questions or would like to talk about anything or anything, just let us know, and we'll be happy to meet with you. So, thank you.